One of the things I used to think is that death was the most difficult part of life. And I don't see it that way anymore. I see death as the most spiritual part of life. Now, I'm making this video because I want to support anyone who's struggling with grief and give you some insight and inspiration on some ways to move through grief in a way that serves you more. Because I've been able to start doing that through experiencing recent grief in my life. I lost a brother, or I have a brother who transitioned in the end of 2022. And so this has been a process that I've learned a lot about. One of the things I'll say that I will say I've been lucky about is that growing up, I didn't have a lot of loss or deaths in my family that were very close to me. But what I did see is how my dad went through a lot of death, and it was really hard. He had a lot of siblings, and every time one of his siblings passed away, there was a piece of him that died. When my dad lost one of his siblings, a part of him died every time. And we noticed it because a part of him closed off from us in our day to day life. So I know it was hard for him, and I'm not making this video to suggest that death is an easy thing to do. It's a challenge. It's hard, but I have also learned how to move through it in a way that has served me. And so we're going to talk about 5 things that can be serving to you. And you can take this video, listen to these tips, especially the last one I'm going to leave, the last one I'm going to share, because that was the most and has been and continues to be the most impactful part of my grieving process. So first, I would like for you to like this video and subscribe to my channel so that more of my content can get out as I continue to support healing our mental health, our spiritual health, all of our health from a holistic paradigm. All right, so the first thing that I really encourage you to do when you're grieving is to, and I think it makes the most sense to do this first. It's the easiest thing is to connect and be intentional about connecting to people who really support you. Who is your support system? In our day-to-day life, do we acknowledge who our true support system is? Those people will show up when you're in these moments of dealing with death and dealing with grief. And a real support system is going to be someone who allows you to grieve, who doesn't try to rush your grieving process, who tries to bring patience, and who tries to bring support, even if they have not experienced what you've experienced yet. They try to bring the support. They acknowledge that you're going through a grieving process, that you have lost someone. So they speak on it. They're not avoiding you. You know, it can be hard sometimes to know what to say to someone when death has occurred. But what I found is that in my life, when I dealt with death, the death of my brother, when people called me, I wasn't looking for them to say anything specific. But it was the fact that they called that I felt all of that. I felt all of it. And so I know that part of support are people who just come around, who call, who acknowledge. That those are people who are real support systems. And people who you will really find are really strong support systems are people who are also going through this grieving process with you. In my family, when my brother passed away, when Brent passed away, I try to say his name because that's how I keep him alive in my heart, is to say his name. So Brent was my brother's name and is my brother's name. And when he passed away, the people who, all of the support I got was very much received and felt. The depth of support that I felt was with the people who were also experiencing this death of this life with me. My mom, my siblings, my niece, his friends. And it also allowed us to have better connection. Just them being able to check in on me and see if I was okay and listen to what may have come up for me and what was coming up for me. But it was also part of it too that I recognized that these people needed me too, because we were going through this together and no one was going to understand it like those people. So recognizing that that is a support system. Sometimes we, in our family, if we're sharing a loss, maybe you don't want to talk to the other person because you don't want to upset them. But it may be that these people really find healing in you all connecting. The second lifestyle tip that I want to give in grieving, where you are more empowered and that you are served better, would be to be intentional about letting go of the people who are not supportive. And this is something I remember, going through loss, is that some people, you hear this saying that you know who the people are for you when you're at the best of times and when you're at the worst of times. And I never used to understand the idea of knowing that someone isn't for you at the worst of times. In my mind, I understood that when you're at the best of times, people who can't be happy for you, they'll show their face. But what I've learned in grieving processes is that when you're at your most difficult moments, people who aren't really supportive just don't know and are not willing to show the support, and that will come out, and so that also looks like not having to, you know, comfort the people who are trying to comfort you, if that makes sense. I remember, seriously, I had a loss when my father passed away. I had a friend who wanted to be involved in supporting me. And so she needed me to give her something to do to make her feel like she was part of things. And that was stressful. At that time, I actually tried to do that because I didn't have that awareness. And what I found is that built a resentment in me. And it also made me exhausted because it wasn't about me at that point. It was about them. And people who are really supportive, you don't have to tell them what to do. They're just going to come and do something. So when you have people who are draining, who need to be included and they need you to help them feel included, that's not support. When you have people who won't be patient with you, if they are in their ego, maybe they show up initially trying to be supportive, but when you are not feeling better based off of the things that they do and they get upset at you because of that, that's not supportive. That's someone else being in their ego and needing you to support them. And this is not what grieving looks like. Real support in grieving looks like you being able to just be, people showing up, doing whatever needs to be done, saying whatever they can to be from a place from their heart center to be able to extend that to you. And also, these are people who when there's someone who's not supportive, these are people who often won't show up. Maybe they don't come around much suddenly when you need them. They were around all the time when you didn't have these difficulties going on. But now when you're in this season of your life, they're not showing up. This is a insight. This is something that can give you insight on who to have in your close circle and who is draining and going to cause you more pain in the end. So being aware and intentional of disconnecting from that energy in the midst of you going through this grieving process. It may end up showing you people who just don't need to be there at all. And it may just show you people who, you know how to position them in your life. Third, and I'm looking at my notes, is to really allow yourself to rest. And the reason I say this is for this very reason. When my brother Brent passed away at the end of 2022, he passed away in December of 2022. And for a period of time, it was like a lot of rush. There was a lot to do. Obviously, there was a lot to do within planning his services. There was a lot to do in dealing with his affairs. There was a lot to do in making sure my mom was okay, checking in on my niece. There were just a lot of things to do, not to mention I live in a society that you don't get a lot of time off for rest when you have lost a loved one. You get a few days, you don't get a lot. And so you basically have to pick up and get back into your routine. So there can be a lot of busyness. And sometimes that busyness can be a way to distract you from feeling what is inevitable. It can distract you from that, which can slow the grieving process. And I remember when Brent passed away in December of 2022, all of the busyness was there. All of that was happening. And then I had a doctor's appointment I'm going to say it was in April of the next year. So 4 months later, I had lost a lot of weight because when I'm stressed, I tend to not eat. So I had lost some weight. And when I went to the doctor, I noticed that I had lost this weight. So when the doctor came in and it's just me and her in this small, intimate room, and she in the intake forms they asked what I was concerned about, and one of the things was weight loss. And when the doctor asked me if I had any stress, and I sat there and thought about it, one of the stresses I had was that I had lost my brother. And in that moment of expressing that to her, I completely broke down. I couldn't control my crying because while I cried some during the process, a lot of it I hadn't released it because I was just so busy. And it was really a moment to make me realize like, wow, this is still in me. And if you really think about it, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to rest and feel our feelings because 4 months of losing someone, that time in between someone's death and 4 months later, the idea that I would think that that's enough time to grieve or be surprised, I shouldn't have been surprised because sometimes grieving is a lifelong process. But, all that busyness just didn't allow me to sit with my feelings, to sit and rest. When you're able to rest, you're able to reflect on the emotions. And I think oftentimes that's what we run from is being able to sit in our emotions because we don't like that pain, that painful feeling. But what I've come to look at that as is that our pain from someone who we've lost really reflects how much we actually love them and the meaning that they brought to life for us in our life. So, it might not feel good, but it is a necessary part of the process. And you can take those emotions that come up and yes, cry and release it. But there may also be times when you rest and you think on those emotions that you smile because you can reflect on funny moments that you had. I had a lot of funny moments with Brent. You can reflect on loving and sentimental moments, things and opportunities where you can look and just really understand how much this person really meant to you and the blessing of being able to experience someone who meant so much. It doesn't mean that it makes it easier, but it does help with a way to serve you, to understand that life and what that life meant to you. The fourth thing that I would say will serve you through your lifestyle in the grieving process would be to really be serious about resolving the regrets that you had from this person who is not here in the physical anymore. Brent, my brother, there were a lot of parts to him, as every person really does have a lot of parts to them. And you realize that about a person, the closer they are to you. And oftentimes a sibling is someone who's so close. They're like a friend plus a family, and so you do know a lot of different parts of them. And my brother Brent who was funny. He was a comedian. He was very skilled. He knew how to work with his hands and do a lot of things, build, paint, repair. He knew how to do a lot of things. He even made his own computer before, built his own computer. He also had drug addiction for a period of his life. He also was a father. He was a son and a brother. He was working in engineering. He was very smart. He was a math whiz. But that part of him dealing with drug addiction, there was a period of time where his drug addiction caused so much pain. I remember thinking, why doesn't he just die so that no one else has to feel all this pain? Because if you've had a loved one who has dealt with drug abuse, you've probably also felt a lot of pain from it. And this was at a period of time where I did feel a lot of pain. I didn't know how to handle his addiction. All I knew was that I was seeing a version of my brother that I felt was deteriorating. And so I remember having that thought, and that wasn't the end of his life. He actually resolved his drug addiction. He overcame that, and it was cancer that is the reason that he passed away. But after he passed away, I realized that even if he had passed away in the midst of his drug addiction, he wasn't only someone who had a drug addiction. There's so many parts that are missing from our family with him not being here in the physical. And what that speaks to is that he meant so much more. He wasn't just that one part of him. That was a part of his experience in this life, but it for sure wasn't most of it, and it wasn't the biggest part. But I had to resolve that part of me, that regret that I have of even thinking that, because I had to understand that that came from my own pain. And in his leaving here physically, it has helped me to recognize that actually, though that pain of his addiction hurts so much, recognizing how much is missing now that he isn't here, helps me to realize that there were other parts of him that superseded a drug addiction that was so much bigger than that. And so I'm able to forgive myself, and be able to appreciate that a person's life is, it is layered, is multi-layered, and it is not just about the pain. We sometimes can get stuck in the pain. That's a heavy emotion, and it's an emotion we don't like, so we resist it a lot. But it's not more powerful, and it's not a bigger emotion than love. And, outside of his addiction, everything else about Brent was love. And even in his addiction, that was about his own personal pain, so there's so much I learned, but I had to let go of the regret of how I saw that and how I thought about that at a period in my life. And I've let go of that by forgiving myself and learning the bigger lesson of his life. So just keep in mind, in our loved one's life, there is a lesson that we can also learn, which brings me to the fifth way that I think a lifestyle shift can serve you in a grieving process of someone that you really love. And that is seeing what happens spiritually through death. Again, life is very much spiritual, but I've seen the spiritual wonder of life through someone's death and dying process, and the actual death that ends up happening of this physical world, because I don't see anyone that's ever ultimately dying, but he has left. People leave this physical experience. And I remember I am a nurse practitioner in profession, and I used to work as a nurse in hospice. Hospice is a program that people get put in sometimes when they are dying. There's nothing else that can be done. And so they choose to go to hospice, where they are kept in comfort as they go through the death and dying process. And one of the things I often saw in people, and I also saw this with my dad, is that when they go through this transition, and sometimes that can be months and weeks before they actually pass away, is that they start talking to people who have passed on already. So they're connected to this physical world, but often I have had so many patients who started talking to people who have passed away. Their family would say, my mom passed away 30 years ago, and, so-and-so has been talking to them. Because oftentimes they're in and out of consciousness. They're here, but they're kind of not here. They're somewhere else. And in that somewhere else, it's like they're seeing these people, they're talking to these people. And I saw this very much with my dad. I saw him at a place where he wanted to know, he was in this in and out. He was here, but then he was more so somewhere else where he wasn't really connecting with what was around him, but he was connecting to something. And it was like he was seeing things, and he would talk to those people. But I've had patients whose their family could tell me more in depth, because maybe that patient would mention the previous person who passed away's name. And it was very consistent, so much consistent that in hospice, most hospice programs have a book that talk about the death and dying process. And one of the parts of the death and dying process mentions that many people will start talking to people who have passed on. And they give this information so that the loved ones caring for them are not alarmed. They understand that it's part of the process. And while it keeps it right there in hospice, when you think about the spiritual process that goes on in this death and dying process, it is very spiritual for something like that to start happening. And even someone, when they do transition, what I've learned is that my brother's life has taught me so much. Sometimes we think that our loved one's life is our life, like they are us, and we don't want to lose them because this is my brother, but he never belonged to me. He came in this life and shared space with me in this life, which was beautiful, but his life was beyond me, but there is so much I can learn from his life, that I can understand what his life meant for me, which it may me have meant something different for someone, my mom, for example. In your life, you may have a loved one you can sit and you can really think about spiritually, thinking about the evolution of their life or how they move through their whole life. What did you learn from their life that you can, with love, take and carry with you? And I think about it with my brother, like we were both running this race. Whew. Okay. We were both running this race. And when he gave me the baton, when he left, it was like, continue on. And whatever is in that baton for me is something about him that I continue to carry while I'm still here. Because that's really going to be what we all experience eventually is that we will leave this physical experience. So it's taught me spiritually what I've learned from his authenticity, what I've learned through the moments of pain in his life that have, caused him to do things that maybe did hurt everyone, but it's taught me about his pain and him overcoming his addictions, taught me about strength that he had and him coming back full circle. Before he left, he was so much more, there was so much that happened in my brother's transition in, the pain that was caused from his addiction. And, everyone's pain isn't coming from addiction, but I'm just highlighting this because it was a part. But him being on the other side of addiction and then being at this part of his life where he was 49 when he was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer, everyone was, in disbelief, including him, I'm sure. But in the process of it all, how we were able to heal so much, all of that was also very spiritual, and how when he has transitioned, now we are all, left with understanding how much he meant. And what it's taught me and it's taught my loved ones is to never take for granted anyone's life because every life is sacred and every life has a purpose. Even if the purpose you don't see how it made you happy, there's something that my brother's soul learned in his pain. But my brother's life did make me happy. He had a moment where it didn't, but it wasn't about me ultimately. It was about him and what his soul learned through all of the things, the good times, the difficult times, the empowered times, the transformative times. And his life has been a portion of what helps to continue to transform me. And I encourage you to really think about what in your loved one's life has helped to transform you, mean to change you into something else. Do you understand what I'm saying? Transformation can always occur. You can transform today, and in 5 years, you transform more. When my brother's life helped me to transform in the way I see healing, the way I view people who deal with addiction, to not judge them because they are human. It's transformed me in the space of love and making space for people. It's transformed me into how to care for myself and to not take fear into the next chapter of my life. So I'm leaving that with you. Let me know in the comments if there's someone who has left this space, if you want to leave in the comments and say their name, because again, as I feel spiritually is that people don't die unless we stop. People don't die unless we stop talking and speaking their name. So this video is in honor of Brent Brown. And again, like this channel, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one. Bye.